Imagine standing on a pile of wood, your hands bound, the smell of cedar and oil filling your lungs. Below you, a soldier approaches with a torch. In 5 minutes, you will be the most expensive bonfire in human history. But here's the thing, you aren't just any victim. You are the man who literally invented the way the world handles wealth. You are the architect of the gold standard. You have more money than any human being in the Western world has ever seen. And yet, all that gold couldn't buy a single drop of rain. This is the story of King Croesus of Lydia. A man who proved that the most dangerous thing you can own isn't a weapon, it's a fortune you think is infinite. Before we understand how he ended up on that pyre, we have to understand where the gold came from. It started with a river called the Pactolus. In the 6th century BC, in what is now modern-day Turkey, the Lydians were sitting on a geological miracle. The river didn't just flow with water, it flowed with electrum, a natural messy alloy of gold and silver. For centuries, people had traded these raw nuggets, but there was a massive problem. Some nuggets were 70% gold, others were 40%. Trading was a nightmare of scales, touchstones and arguments. It was slow, it was inefficient, it was old money. Croesus saw a gap in the market. He realized that if he could guarantee the purity of the metal, he would control the flow of value itself. He ordered his scientists to do the impossible, separate the gold from the silver. This was the birth of metallurgy as a financial weapon. He created the Croeseid, the world's first standardized gold coin, stamped with the fierce image of a lion and a bull. Suddenly, you didn't need to weigh metal at every stall in the market. You just looked for the king's lion. Lydia became the world's first liquid economy. Wealth wasn't just sitting in a vault. It was moving. It was multiplying. And as the middleman for every transaction between the Greek West and the Persian East, Croesus became the undisputed gatekeeper of the world's treasury. He wasn't just rich, he was the gold standard before the term even existed. Success at this level does something to the human brain. It creates a psychological blind spot called the endowment effect. Croesus began to believe that his wealth was a reflection of his moral standing, that the gods loved him because he was rich. This is where he met Solon. Solon was the wisest man in Athens, a philosopher who didn't care for coins. Croesus, eager for a high-status ego boost, invited Solon to his capital, Sardis. He gave him the grand tour. He showed him the vaults where gold dust was piled like grain. He showed him the Temple of Artemis, which he was funding, a building so large it would eventually become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. After the tour, Croesus asked the question he'd been dying to hear the answer to. Solon, who is the happiest man you have ever met? He was waiting for his own name. He was waiting for the validation that his bank account equaled his soul's worth. But Solon named a dead soldier. Then he named 2 dead sons, who had died in their sleep after helping their mother. Croesus was insulted. He looked the king in the eye and said, "The gods are jealous. They give us a glimpse of happiness, and then they tear us up by the roots. Count no man happy until he is dead." Croesus laughed. He thought Solon was a fool. He thought Solon was poor-splaining life to him. He dismissed the philosopher and went back to his gold. He didn't realize that Solon wasn't giving him a lecture. He was giving him a forecast. The problem with being the richest man in the room is that everyone else in the room is looking for a way to take your chair. To the east, a new power was rising. The Persians, led by a man named Cyrus the Great. Cyrus didn't have gold coins. He didn't have marble temples. He had a hungry army and a vision for an empire that would span 3 continents. Croesus felt the pressure. He felt the Thucydides trap, the fear that a rising power would eventually consume his established one. He decided on a preemptive strike. But even with all his money, he was terrified. So, he decided to buy the best intelligence on the planet. He sent massive shipments of gold to the Oracle of Delphi in Greece. We're talking about a solid gold lion weighing over 500 pounds. He sent silver bowls that could hold 5,000 gallons of wine. He basically funded the Oracle's entire operation for a decade. In return, he asked one question: should I attack the Persians? The Oracle gave the most famous, most expensive, and most devastating answer in history. If you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire. Croesus celebrated. He threw more gold at the priests. He assumed the great empire was Persia. He assumed his money had bought him a divine guarantee. He crossed the river, and in that moment, he learned the difference between price and value. The Lydian army was a precision instrument. They had the world's greatest cavalry. Their horses were elite, their armor was gilded, and their confidence was sky-high. They met the Persians at the Battle of Pteria. It was a stalemate. Croesus, following the gentleman's rules of ancient warfare, decided to head back to his capital for the winter. He figured he'd call his allies, spend some more gold on mercenaries, and finish the job in the spring. But Cyrus the Great didn't play by the rules of the wealthy. Cyrus didn't go into winter quarters. He chased Croesus all the way back to the walls of Sardis. When the Lydians realized the Persians were at their gates, they scrambled. They sent their legendary cavalry out to crush the barbarians. But Cyrus had a secret weapon, a pattern interrupt that no amount of Lydian gold could have predicted. He had noticed during the march that Lydian horses were terrified of the smell of camels. So, he took his baggage camels, stripped them of their packs, put soldiers on their backs, and placed them in the front line. The Lydian horses, the most expensive, well-trained animals in the world, caught one whiff of the camels and lost their minds. They bolted, they threw their riders, they turned the perfect Lydian defense into a chaotic massacre. The great empire the oracle spoke of, it wasn't Persia, it was Lydia. Croesus had paid a fortune to hear a prophecy that described his own funeral. The siege of Sardis didn't last long. The Persians found a secret path up the impenetrable cliffs of the citadel. The richest city in the world fell in a single night. And that brings us back to the pyre. Cyrus the Great was a man of logic, but he was also curious. He wanted to see if the gods would really save a man as rich as Croesus. He ordered the king to be burned alive as a sacrifice. As the wood began to catch, as the heat began to blister his skin, Croesus finally understood the price he had paid for his ego. He remembered the old philosopher in the white robe. He screamed out, "Solon! Solon! Solon!" Cyrus was intrigued. He had his interpreters ask what the name meant. Croesus explained the warning, that wealth is a shadow, that luck is a vapor, and that no man is truly happy until his story is over. Cyrus, a man who was currently at the peak of his own power, felt a chill. He realized that one day he might be the one on the pyre. He realized that he was just a man, and that fate is the only true king. He ordered the fire to be put out, but the flames were too high. The soldiers couldn't get close enough. The richest man in history was about to become ash. Then, something happened that historians and legends have argued over for 2,500 years. According to the accounts, Croesus, the man who had spent his life relying on the lion and the bull, cried out to Apollo. He stopped relying on his coins and started relying on his regret. Suddenly, the sky turned black. A torrential rainstorm, out of nowhere, drenched the pyre. The flames died instantly. Croesus sat in the soot, wet and shivering, but alive. Cyrus didn't execute him after that. He did something much more interesting. He made Croesus his personal advisor. The man who once owned the world's gold spent the rest of his life as a servant to the man who took it. He watched as the Persians took his invention, the gold coin, and used it to fund the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The Lydian lion lived on, but the Lydian king was gone. The story of Croesus is often told as a myth, but the archaeological evidence is real. We have the coins, we have the ruins of the refineries, we have the inscriptions in the temples. But the real lesson isn't about metallurgy or ancient strategy. It's about the Croesus complex. We live in a world that worships liquidity, standardized success, and the idea that we can buy our way out of risk. We think that if we hit a certain number, we are safe. Croesus had the highest number in history. He had the golden touch, but he forgot that money only has value because of the systems we build around it. When the system changes, when the camels show up, or when the river dries up, or when a new empire rises, your gold is just heavy, soft metal. He died as a man who knew the price of everything, but the value of nothing. Next time you look at a coin, or check your bank balance, or feel the rush of a sure-thing investment, remember the smoke of Sardis. Remember that the gods are jealous. And remember the one thing Croesus couldn't buy with all the gold in the world, a moment of humility before the fire starts. Because, as Solon said, the story isn't over until it's over. So what's your story worth? And more importantly, who are you calling out to when the rain doesn't fall?